Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Royal Palace podcast. So, on our last episode, our friend and faithful listener, Rachel, who lives in China, got in touch to say that we were butchering the pronunciation of Shein. And as a result, we've invited her to come on and tell us how to pronounce Shein, and also to talk in general about fashion, French luxury fashion, and Chinese budget fashion, and everything in between, which, of course, when talking about France, this is a very important topic. This is one of the main things people think about when they think about France. And it's also big business. Europe's richest man, Bernard Arnault, is the owner of LVMH, which is one of the main companies we'll be talking about today. Also the second most valuable company in Europe. And it's something we haven't really talked about because Patrick and I are extremely unfashionable. So, Rachel, thanks for coming on. We've also got our cultural correspondent, Nancy, back to also tell us about fashion.
Yes, and as your cultural correspondent, I can confirm you are indeed deeply unfashionable, but it's okay.
True.
We have reinforced the troops. We now have Rachel with us to
Yes,
help
bringing
address that
women on to talk
pressing
about
issue.
fashion, not beating the stereotypes.
I've ordered every federal agency to eliminate rules that don't make sense.
It's the usual French talk of stall and surrender.
All scientists dying are footprints.
Cultural hold the
Who Americans have given us extent was very easy. Make our planet great again.
Well, so first of all, the way that you pronounce Shein properly in Chinese is Shein. So maybe you guys can give it a try.
Shein.
Good. I can tell you've been practicing
Shein.
your tones. How about you, Patrick?
Shein.
Wrong. Wrong tones. No, that's the hardest part with Chinese. I am also very bad with Chinese tones, and my teacher never hesitates to tell me so, and you just have to face ego death when learning how to speak Chinese because you will say things about 1,000,000 times and think you said it right, and then you always have said it wrong. But yeah, thank you for having me on to talk about fashion. I really appreciate it. As someone who's more of a, let's say, like a sideline quarterback type of fashion industry person. I follow fashion. I love fashion, but I have absolutely nothing to do in my day-to-day life with fashion aside from just the clothes I wear. So I'm
It's good. No conflict of interest.
Yeah, no conflict of interest. Exactly. I do not work for the fashion industry at all. I do not have enough money to buy the majority of the fashion that I'm going to talk about today, but, I consider myself somewhat knowledgeable at least because I've been into fashion since I was like in middle school and following the industry and just learning about it. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I thought a way that we could start the episode would be if you guys are interested, you could guess, or I'm going to give you guys some brands, and I want you to tell me if they are part of LVMH or not, because LVMH, Nancy's going to give more details about the founding of the company, but it is a huge conglomerate with, like all sorts of different brands and all sorts of different industries, okay? So, are you ready?
I already know all these because I've researched LVMH before,
Damn it,
especially
you
when
studied?
we did
Okay.
our French. Well, when we did our French media episode.
Okay, so
they
you know the
own,
media
as
ones,
well as
okay.
all the weird brands they own, the fashion and so on brands they own. They also own Le Parisien, one of France's biggest newspapers.
Right,
Bizarrely.
okay.
But
All right, well, I'll still try.
this is
Maybe
for Patrick then.
will
Yeah.
more. Okay, so obviously they own Louis Vuitton, they own Moët, they own Hennessy, so I'm not going to
That's-
ask those.
To be
but
clear,
what the
I
letters
don't
are
know
for,
what
right?
Moe is.
Moet, the champagne.
Is that how you pronounce
Oh,
it?
that's
I always
how.
thought it was pronounced Moet. No, I'm not sure.
I think it's
Moët
Moët.
Chandon.
That's what I've heard too.
Okay.
And
I
that's
don't
the
know.
M in LVMH, Patrick.
Yeah, the M is Moet,
Gotcha.
and then the H is Hennessy. Okay, so those
Which
are the
is
obvious
for our
ones. I'm not-
unsophisticated listeners. That's champagne.
Exactly. All right, so how about Sephora,
I wouldn't
LVMH
know.
or not?
I have no idea.
Guess.
Gun to your head.
Sure, why not?
All right, yes, it is. So Sephora is one of their biggest brands, and it's actually one of the ones that they see as kind of like their more accessible brands because it's primarily makeup, which is
Oh,
much
it
more
is true.
affordable.
I know normal women who buy stuff from there.
Okay, all right. Interested in what your definition of a normal woman is, but we'll continue.
Well, I feel like I don't know that many people who buy really expensive bags, or if they do, I wouldn't know they're really expensive bags.
Mm-hmm.
But
Well,
I
you
feel-
know me, and I have
feel like
a few
I
expensive
feel like I've
bags.
heard girls say, "Oh, I gotta buy something at Sephora before."
Sephora does not sell bags, though. Sephora sells makeup.
They sell makeup.
So,
They sell makeup. Yeah.
yeah, most
I know-
women.
I know
Nancy,
that.
you've bought makeup from Sephora, right?
I have been known to have purchased
Yes,
makeup at
myself
Sephora.
as well. So Nancy and I have both bought from LVMH brands, Sephora being one of them. Okay, what about Gucci? LVMH or not?
I think not? Question mark.
Not. It is actually a Kering brand. So Kering is one of the other big fashion and luxury conglomerates. And it's much more focused on fashion and specifically the fashion industry, unlike LVMH, which has brands from other industries. So let's think maybe like Grey Goose, because LVMH has some alcohol brands. Is Grey Goose LVMH or not?
Sure.
It is not. It is actually owned by
Okay.
Bacardi, but Belvedere vodka is owned by LVMH, as is Aoyun, another Chinese brand, which is a Chinese wine brand that I had considered actually trying to buy a bottle of and do a live taste testing as another little silly gimmick. But unfortunately, their wine starts at like $200 to $300 a bottle, so I did not procure one of Aoyun's vintages.
Well, as a good anecdote for our listeners here, when I first got to France, one of the things I did, because for me, I believe all wine is the same. So I went to Carrefour with one of my friends, and we went to the bottom shelf wine in France, which happens to taste really good. And we bought every bottle, of which there were many, that was under €2. We brought it home. We did a taste test and picked which one we liked the best, and then we just always stocked our college apartment with that bottle. It was €180 a bottle, and all the French people I told that it was like a €20 bottle of wine, they all believed it.
I'm worried Patrick may get expelled from the country if we put this out now after telling that story.
Well, maybe
Okay.
now that we've been gaining some new listeners and subscribers, maybe it's time to plug the fact that if you want us to have a premium Patreon tier, you should email us. And what was it, Patrick? If at least 5 people email you, or 1 people with 5 email addresses, we will consider doing paid premium episodes, and maybe we can do a more sophisticated tasting of
Yes.
LVMH alcohol brands.
Patrick will
I think that
start
would be very fun.
buying only Veuve Clicquot.
Yeah. Go to that. That's
Another
a good call out, Nancy.
LA
Go to
watch.
royalpalacemedia.com. Throw in your email address when you click the subscribe button. You'll get notified every time we have an episode, and you'll show us you like hearing us. And it's okay if you've only decided to do this because now we have 2 women on the pod.
Maybe we should do Patreon tiers that are named
Stand
off
with
of
women.
like the lowest
Right.
tier is
Loyal Palace
180
The
euro
lowest
bottle
tier
of
is the
wine
cooking
from-
wine tier.
Yeah.
The second tier is the €5 fucking like Carrefour brand tier. And then the top tier is the Veuve Clicquot tier. And if anyone signs up for that, we will. I'm promising this right now, as someone who is only for the first time on the podcast, we will do a Veuve Clicquot tasting. So get excited for
Have
that.
you guys ever had Veuve Clicquot? I don't think
I have not. I've had Moët though. I've had Moët, and that's very good, but I've never had Veuve Clicquot.
I
If you
think
talk
it's
to
a
the
bit
real
sugary to me.
champagne heads, and Patrick and I are not champagne heads, but are adjacent because we lived 2 years in the Champagne region. If you talk to the real heads, they say that all those big brands are garbage, and like the only good ones are the single town, because those are all blends. They're from different villages.
I believe that.
So the real heads want the like one vineyard vintages that you've never heard of, but are also very, very expensive.
Well, and I feel like that's a really good, actually, funny enough, transition into talking about like luxury fashion in general and like what is luxury fashion, where does it come from, right? And everybody knows it really comes from this idea that it is fundamentally something that's not accessible, right? It's not meant to be something that everybody knows about, right? And so that's kind of LVMH is an interesting conglomerate, because if you look at the brands that they own, a lot of them are these like more famous and like accessible luxury brands. And you know, when we talk about the luxury industry in general, right, there is a strategy that LVMH has pursued, which is that, you know, what they've realized, if you want to make a large profit and become the largest company in Europe, in France, right? Or I believe second largest in Europe it was, right? So biggest in France, second largest in Europe.
They were the largest in Europe. They were the first European company to pass $500 billion market cap, but they've fallen. They've been in trouble the past like 2 years. I think you'll get into some of the scandals they've had, and so they're now second after ASML.
Okay. But yeah, a big part of their strategy has been kind of not only expanding rapidly and, you know, acquiring a whole range of different brands that, you know, range from extremely expensive, right? Like these extremely expensive fashion brands versus, you know, quite affordable brands like Sephora, right? That carry makeup that teenage girls can afford, you know. That's kind of part of their strategy, right? Is they've realized that in order to become wealthy and to have such a high valuation, you do have to kind of have something for everyone. And so, you know, when I was listening to your guys' episode last week, when you were talking about Shein and this controversy over Shein and kind of people really reacting negatively to opening a Shein boutique in BHV, which is one of these luxury department stores in Paris, it really brought to mind for me this idea that, you know, we make this almost like false distinction in our heads between what is luxury, what isn't, just purely based on price, when, you know, kind of what I'm going to try and show in the episode, or what I personally believe, is that, you know, price is not really the best way to figure out, one, if something is truly good quality, if it's something truly luxurious, and also two, most of luxury, both in France and anywhere, is, I mean, we all know this, right? It's just marketing. And because of kind of France's history and kind of the history of the luxury industry in France, you know, people have really come to associate France and Europe in general with luxury and quality, when this isn't really always the case. So yeah, if you want, we can kind of just get started with that, I guess.
Absolutely. Get into it.
Cool. Well, so you guys kind of talked about the Shein controversy a bit last week. But basically what's going on is this, you know, Chinese online retailer, Shein, which was founded in 2008. And they're kind of more of a platform or like drop shipping website, which again, a lot of people don't really understand. And so when you're looking at the controversy that's happening right now in France, it feels like a lot of French people, or a lot of the just like average, let's say, media consuming public, really almost views them as a brand, the way that you would view, like, you know, for example, a Louis Vuitton or a Zara, where from top to bottom, they control the production, they control the factories, the distribution, etc. But that is really not the case for Shein. Shein is actually more like an Amazon, which again is kind of like, okay, you know, nobody has a problem with Amazon, or people do, but nobody's trying to shut it down in France, I'm assuming.
It's a bit like AliExpress, right?
Kind of, but it's
for
more fashion focused.
Yeah.
AliExpress, you can get virtually anything, whereas Shein has always been fashion oriented.
Including the pedocriminal dolls, apparently. They mentioned that on the news the other week, that you can also get pedocriminal dolls on Alibaba and AliExpress.
Well, exactly, right? Because then it's, I mean, to be clear, for the record, I do not support the purchasing or the selling or the production of these pedocriminal dolls, as Patrick put it. But again, when you have a drop shipping website like this, where it's just like anyone can sell anything that they're making, right? Things are going to slip through the cracks, especially in China, where there's far less regulation of the market of things like online selling, etc. But in any case, right? So that's Shein, and you know, they are a fast fashion primarily focused website, right? They're the largest online only fashion platform, and they do have their own factories and like branded products now, but they are incredibly cheap, incredibly poor quality. You know, not to talk too much about Shein as opposed to LVMH, but the funniest thing with regards to kind of fast fashion in China is that a lot of the products that are actually sold on Shein and Temu and websites like that are not actually destined for Chinese consumers. A lot of the time, Chinese consumers have a much higher quality standards, and are willing to pay higher prices for higher quality goods that are produced in China, Whereas, again, kind of part of my thesis, right, that like countries themselves have these reputations that bleed into, virtually anything that they produce, right? Anything that's produced in China is kind of almost painted with this brush of poor quality and labor exploitation, which isn't always the case. But because of that, people in Europe, in North America, aren't really willing to pay higher prices for, stuff that is produced in China. So because of that, if you are a producer in China, a factory owner, you know that if your goal is to export, you cannot sell it for a high price. And so you end up having to cut corners. And that's what ends up leading to a lot of the issues with labor exploitation, environmental issues, etc. But, there is a huge demand for these products in North America and in Europe. So, it's kind of a chicken or an egg situation. Like, if there is demand for it, like, somebody is going to find a way to sell it, right? So that is kind of what Shein is. And there's a big controversy right now in France, as you guys talked about last week, over the fact that, they're partnering with BHV, this like somewhat luxury department store in Paris, to open its first physical store as a way for BHV reach out to younger customers who clearly have certain price constraints. So they're not, buying the expensive brands that are typically being sold at these department stores. But this has been, as far as I know, as far as I could find, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, it's been kind of put on hold because of the pedocriminal dolls, so to speak. Are you guys aware? Is it still happening or still on hold?
I believe they're still opening the store, and I think they even opened one in Grenoble, or they're announced the opening of one in Grenoble as well, like through BHV. But
Interesting.
One thing I saw, I think it was last week, was that like essentially what's happening is the Paris municipality, like the Hôtel de Ville, which is right next to the Paris Town Hall, is right next to BHV, the big department store, that they're sort of like beefing, and essentially the Paris municipality banned open air Christmas market and like kind of Christmas festivities that are
Really?
typically like hosted like in public space right in front of BHV, and also right in front of the Hôtel de Ville, right, like the Paris Town Hall building, and essentially it sounded like they banned it in relation to the whole controversy with
Wow.
opening a Shein store at BHV. So I feel like, yeah, I honestly don't know how to analyze it other than I feel like I don't know, politicians like kind of using, or the media also just using this as some sort of kind of attention grabbing, capturing whatever controversy, and like getting people kind of riled up against opening a Chinese like fashion store in this like very traditional whatever French department store. I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's kind of what I've been seeing through this too, right? Because, as I'm going to get into, the whole idea behind like luxury fashion, and specifically French luxury fashion, is, I would say, a really core part not only of France's kind of branding abroad, but also its kind of national image.
Absolutely.
The idea that, we are a country that really values quality. We are a country that really values, we have very high standards for things like food, like our clothes, everything, right?
Yeah, that's why McDonald's is one of the biggest brands in France right now.
Exactly. But the way that people see themselves, and the way the country, I think, sees itself, is that like, this is high quality, this is luxury. And even if people are aware of the fact that, yeah, there are a lot of French people that eat McDonald's and purchase things from Shein, this idea of France equals luxury is huge in France's marketing. And that's what people abroad, whether it's in the United States or China, that is what they associate with France. And what really made me think of this was when I was kind of reading about this issue, I saw a protester holding this sign that said, "La France n'est pas à vendre," like France is not for sale, which I just thought was the most hilarious thing that you could write on one of these protest signs about Shein, because France not only is for sale, that's basically all France does, is sell herself, right, to the people as this high-end luxury brand,
Yeah.
And we
that
sold
protest
ourselves to LVMH, right? Who
And that-
controls our media.
And that protest was
Exactly.
outside of a department store. Department stores are for sale. That's the whole point. Like,
No,
what do you
exactly.
mean?
And I mean,
what are you talking about?
again, ironically, some of the biggest market for these luxury brands that are owned by LVMH is actually in China, because China has a lot of wealthy people and a growing kind of middle bourgeois class that, until very, very recently has been purchasing obscene amounts of luxury products primarily produced by LVMH and others to show that, like, we are wealthy, we are bourgeois, right? Like, we have the money to buy things like this. And that's kind of always been a part of France and France's national identity. And that being said, though, this conflict between luxury versus popular, fashion, has always been there from the very beginning, right? So really what I wanted to get into was kind of what role does fashion and luxury play in this kind of French national identity and economy, and why has Shein, of all things, become so much more controversial than any of the other bajillion, fast fashion brands in that are available in Europe right now. So if you guys don't mind, I was just going to start with like a general introduction of fashion and luxury in France, and then I think Nancy did some good research on LVMH as a company and its history that she'll do after that. So the roots of French fashion and kind of luxury fashion, as with many things in French law, French culture, French politics, come from the court of Louis XIV at Versailles. And generally speaking, this is when kind of the French reputation for fashion and luxury really are born, right? So, this is the height of France's power, when, it's, a huge military power and has a huge amount of influence, not just, in Europe, but really, it's starting to have more of a global influence with the growth of the French colonial empire, trading with Asia, trading with North America, for things like fur, things like textiles, etc., silk, right? So, really this is when France is like growing as both an economic, military, cultural power. And have you guys done an episode about like Versailles, the French Revolution, anything like that, like pre-revolution France?
I don't think so.
Yeah, not really, no.
Okay, cool. Well, I mean, I teach a lot about that. My day job is a history teacher, and I actually do a big 1-month unit about the French Revolution every year. So this is something I am used to talking a lot about. But what's interesting about France, and specifically the court of Louis XIV at Versailles, is that France had a very large class of nobles and aristocrats. Like, especially if you compare it to the other kind of rival European power at that time, Great Britain, France had a significantly larger class of aristocrats because they had this thing called noblesse de robe, whereas if like any sort of like judge or any legal professional, you would basically be given a title of nobility. You were still lower nobility, but this results in a situation where France has a huge nobility compared to Great Britain, and they really are like a competing center of power for Louis XIV, which, as an absolute monarch, right, what he is trying to do is kind of tamp down the power of the nobility and the aristocracy so that he can centralize his power, right? And one way that he does this was the higher echelons of the nobility were supposed to live at Versailles with him, right? That's why Versailles Palace is so massive. It wasn't just like his personal McMansion. Like, there was a whole host of, I think, upwards of like 4,000 nobles living at Versailles, and this was his method of controlling the nobility, right? There's a really great primary source I read every year with my students from the Duke of St. Simon talking about like what it was like living at Versailles and how, this was his method, Louis XIV's method of controlling the nobility, right? Because rather than being in their regional, provincial home where they have a quite large control of local politics, local economics, etc., by making them live in Versailles, now they can be kind of controlled by Louis XIV. And, a huge part of living at Versailles was like keeping up with the Joneses, essentially. So you were expected to spend a lot of money on things like fashion. You were expected to go to these really lavish parties, and you were expected to participate in gambling, which is something that, he really loved, right? Like playing all of these things like roulette and cards, etc. So this is really,
by the way, what we are going to offer to our platinum future patron tier.
That's the Versailles tier.
Yes, that's the Versailles tier. You can live with the Royal Palace podcast.
You've got the Marie Antoinette curly hair, just so the listeners are aware. Nancy's got the Marie Antoinette wig on right now.
Yes, that is 100%
And
proven correct.
but yeah, so it's like this whole kind of fashion industry really starts at Versailles because there's a huge market for it, which are the nobility who basically spend their whole day just like partying, drinking, and wearing expensive stuff, right? And this also becomes a really poignant issue during the French Revolution because, again, Marie Antoinette, the French court at Versailles in general, is seen as very wasteful, spending lots of money on these kind of frivolous things like luxury fashion, while the people are, spending upwards of 80% of their income on something as simple as bread, right? So in this revolutionary era, having luxurious fashion comes to be seen as something quite negative, right? And it's, something that is targeted, right? So this is kind of a, let's say, low point for the luxury industry. But then really when the revolution is, let's say, to a certain extent ended or put on hold with, the return to monarchy or the Napoleonic era, right? This is really in the 19th century where France starts to industrialize more rapidly, and whereas there's this growth of the kind of middle classes or the bourgeois classes who are, nouveau riche, right? This is the era of conspicuous consumption, where people basically are showing off their newfound wealth and their newfound status in society under, especially like the mid-century Napoleon III, right? Or the late, Third Republic, where now a way to show that your status in society as a kind of nouveau riche is what kind of luxury brands are you wearing, and how fashionable you are. So this is also the era in which Louis Vuitton is originally founded, and that is a huge part of their early clientele. It is, the lower aristocracy and the nouveau riche. So, Nancy, I'll let you kind of start talking about LVMH specifically.
Sure. Thanks, Rachel, for bringing us in. But yeah, so basically, LVMH was, or at the time, the Louis Vuitton company was founded in 1854 by the man himself, Louis Vuitton. And just to give you, a little bit of history, so he was born to a family of artisans, carpenters, and farmers. And when he was young, like at the age of 10, his mother, who was a hat maker, died, and then his father died soon after. He had a difficult relationship with his adoptive stepmother, and basically, at the age of 13 in 1835, he left his childhood home in Jura, in the Franche-Comté region, and he basically kind of traveled on foot, taking odd jobs along the way until he arrived in Paris almost 2 years later in 1837, in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. Then he essentially began apprenticing under a certain Monsieur Maréchal, who was a kind of well-known, successful trunk maker and packer. And so essentially within a few years, Louis Vuitton himself gained a reputation among the Paris elite as one of the city's best, essentially, trunk makers, right? And then after the reestablishment of the French Empire under Napoleon III, Vuitton was then hired as the personal trunk maker and packer for the Empress Eugénie, who, kind of similar to Marie Antoinette, had a very kind of lavish, expensive taste, and had been particularly a taste for luxury trips and vacations, especially in the Pyrenees. And that was kind of in the middle of the, as I said, the Industrial Revolution, and when the train network in France was being developed and expanded in a significant way. So essentially he was the personal trunk maker and packer for the Empress Eugénie.
That's an industry that you don't hear much about anymore. Luxury trunk making. I
Yeah.
think that's gonna have a comeback. I'd like a good trunk. I mean, that's
I would
pretty
love
cool.
to have a good luxury trunk maker and packer.
And packer.
She's charged him specifically with packing the most beautiful clothes in a quite exquisite way. So apparently not only making solid, good quality, and aesthetically pleasing trunks was not the only part of the task. It was also packing the clothes
That seems like a
in
waste
a
of his time.
luxurious way. I mean, yeah.
Well, to be
Couldn't they have found
fair,
someone else to do
both
that?
of this era are quite intricate, so to speak, and so especially for a woman, packing them would take a lot of work and a lot of effort. So I can actually understand why you would need someone to do that professionally. It's not just, cotton t-shirts like we all have today, right? It's pretty intricate that, and again, you're a bourgeois lady, you're not going to do that yourself. No, you need to show that you're a rich woman. You are going to hire someone to pack your shit for you.
Yeah. I mean, at least he was an artisan. Like, I feel like there was a craft there that you don't
Oh yeah,
really
well that's how all of
see
these
today
houses
anymore.
start.
Yeah.
All of these brands start with genuine artisanship, genuine craftsmanship. Sorry to butt in, but this is the era when, like, you kind of, if you know, was the name of the game, right? Like, not the average person did not know who Louis Vuitton was. Like, they did not know what this industry was. You just got some bag from the leather maker down the street from you, right? And you held on to that for generations. So, even knowing about these brands used to be a much more of a well-kept secret. But sorry to butt in, Nancy.
No worries at all. But yeah, so basically it was at that time that Vuitton introduced his revolutionary rectangular canvas trunks. That was at a time when the market only had rounded top leather trunks, so that was kind of seen as a key innovation because also
What?
it is actually more practical to pack and like
This the
stack.
shit that counts as
Yeah,
an
how are they
innovation
stacking trunks?
back then.
Yeah,
I guess they just didn't stack them.
guess not, or maybe just people didn't tend to travel with as many suitcases as the Empress Eugenie during her lavish trips to the Pyrenees. I don't know. But yeah, so that was kind of his signature, and then it was during his lifetime that he kind of introduced the iconic monogram, the LV, that you can see to this day on a lot of the Louis Vuitton designs, especially in handbags and suitcases, including the kind of the red stripe on the monogram. That was also, yeah, that dates all the way back to the 1870s, and apparently, yeah, basically the demand for his durable, lightweight, kind of ergonomic designs really grew among the Paris elite, and he even expanded into a larger workshop at Agnières-sur-Seine. That's a suburb uh, where he kind of strategically was placed on the banks of the Seine to take advantage of essentially the river um, transport and supply chain. However, in 1871, as a result of the Franco-Prussian War, the demand for his kind of luxury trunks and suitcases fell sharply, and then his workshop was in shambles. But he bounced back around. He rebuilt a new workshop at number 1 Rue Scribe. I actually don't know where exactly that is, but it was next to a prestigious jockey club in the heart of Paris. Um, and yeah, he worked there. By the way, I think the workshop at Agnières-sur-Seine is still kind of to this day owned by LVMH, and they do. It's not open to the public, but they do have kind of a museum and they do guided tours on demand.
Bernard Arnault is there all day packing trunks.
Yeah, I know. One does not simply walk into the iconic atelier Louis Vuitton in Agnières-sur-Seine. But yeah, so Louis Vuitton died in 1892 after a severe and aggressive cancer, and then the company's management was passed on to his son Georges Vuitton, who kind of further expanded um, the company's operations. He also introduced for the first time a lot of kind of also signature today emblems of LV in addition to the monogram. One of them is, and I don't know how to pronounce this word, quatrefoils. Like the four leaf. It's kind of like a four leaf clover. It's one of the
Yeah.
it's kind of part of the iconic imagery, and it's on a lot of also branded Louis Vuitton items, and a lot of those kind of additional brand symbols that he introduced were inspired by Japanese family crests. So some nice late 19th century Orientalism. And actually, very interestingly, to this day, like LVMH makes 25% of its revenue in Japan. So
Really?
Japan is not only
Yeah.
an Orientalist inspiration, but also today a big
It's not
market.
surprising.
Do you
I
know
would
much in
argue even
China?
yeah, same in China. China luxury fashion and especially branding again is huge and kind of part of my broader point that I want to make in this episode is the fact that like this always has, luxury fashion and consumption of luxury has just always been a way to show that like you've made it. You are a part of the well-off class, right? You are a part of the bourgeoisie and, especially in the growing kind of wealthy class here in China since, reform and opening up in the 80s and 90s, a very easy way and still very poignant way to show that, you have money, you are cultured is by purchasing Western and primarily French luxury fashion. There's been a bit of a growth of a local Chinese luxury industry and some interesting kind of Chinese designers. And I'm not so familiar with Japan, but, I would argue that probably the place I see the most LV, like Louis Vuitton in particular, is here in Shanghai. Like, it is incredibly common to see even like some of my high school students will bring like LV, wallets or like shoes or whatever to school because, they have a uniform and that's one of the ways that they can show off, right? Is by their like whatever their wallet or their phone case has like the monogram on it. And this also has to tie in with why the fake industry, right, loves LV because it's such a recognizable monogram, which now has kind of become associated, I would argue, in a lot of countries with being kind of tacky because once it becomes too accessible, it's no longer luxury. But that's not necessarily the case in Asia yet. But yeah, back to you, Nancy.
Yeah, and also
sorry.
I feel like I mean I don't have any numbers to back it up, but like in front of me, but I feel like a lot of the kind of in-store clientele in Paris of luxury brands is very much driven by like Asian like East Asian tourists.
Absolutely.
And very funnily, the other day I was having coffee with a Japanese friend of mine who was telling me that he doesn't live in Paris anymore, but when he did, he hated going to like Galeries Lafayette, which is one of the other kind of big department stores or any of those places, because like he would just be like walking through and then like essentially the shop assistants would always like kind of like try to essentially corner him and would tell him like it would say like ni hao and like would just automatically assume that he's Chinese and he's in the market for luxury goods.
Yeah,
Have
and
you
go
guys
into
heard of the? I can't believe I hadn't brought this up yet. The Louis Vuitton ship that we've got here in Shanghai now.
No, what?
No.
Yeah, so on West Nanjing Road, which is kind of like our Champs-Élysées here in Shanghai. I mean, I say our as if I'm Chinese, to be clear for the listeners. I am not Chinese. I am white American. But I do live in Shanghai, and West Nanjing Road is kind of like our Champs-Élysées. It's like the biggest kind of shopping, kind of pedestrian luxury street here in Shanghai. It's a big touristy area, and people absolutely love luxury. They love Louis Vuitton, and the kind of Louis Vuitton flagship there made this like gigantic, like atrociously ugly metal ship as like the exterior of it's like the facade of their flagship location, and people will line up to take photos there. They have this whole like experience where you can like go through. It's the most like absurd thing ever, but people love it. I happened upon it.
This is obscene.
Yeah, wait, I'll share my screen. I just went and like Googled it for you guys.
This is horrific. I cannot believe this exists.
Wait.
People need to know about this in France. This is embarrassing.
Yeah, no, it's hilarious, and they're really.
If they did this in
marketing
Paris, there'd be a huge outcry.
Yeah, no, it's absurd, but again, people
This
love
is
it.
nothing compared to Shein.
Yeah, wait, like look at this. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
The listeners cannot. But
So this is West Nanjing Road again. Like this would be like as if it were on like Champs-Élysées or something like that, or in Paris. Like it is enormous. You
Shein
cannot
should build
miss
an even
it.
bigger one in Paris, in the Place de l'Hôtel de Ville or whatever.
Yes, they should demolish the Hôtel de Ville and just put a massive ship in its place with the
right. So it's
LV
like
monograms.
no, people love luxury, but in particular Louis Vuitton luxury here. And I'll talk about two kind of why specifically Louis Vuitton is so popular. But
But just to sort of reiterate something you were saying before you carry on with your history, Nancy, sorry, is that like it's their branding is so inseparable from Paris and the global image of Paris, and this has been a huge coup for them. That like all around the world, people who have never been to Paris, of course, Paris is synonymous with luxury branding, and you see the ads for like Chanel and all these companies. It's always, Paris, Paris buildings, Paris Metro. Not actually in the Paris Metro because that's not very sexy, but the little nice little signs they have for the Paris Metro, and it's crazy. I mean, it's like, like Milan is just as much a capital of like real high fashion as Paris, as far as I understand. No, sorry to all the French listeners who get offended by hearing that, but that's what
That's true.
fashion people tell me. But there is no sense in which Milan has that image in like, the global imagination. It's crazy what they've done with Paris.
I mean, even to the point where you will find like gobbledygook nonsense French written on stuff here, and it is clearly being branded to be like luxurious. I mean, even there's a French woman I follow on Instagram who lives in China, lives in Shanghai. Her husband is Chinese. She's lived here for ages, and her business is importing French wine to China and like marketing it and selling it. And part of her also marketing is going on social media and kind of explaining real French wine versus fake French wine, what is, AOP, things like that. And it's hilarious because she made this video where she was showing like fake French wines that were being sold, and it's literally like just the French that is written on the labels, just like absolute nonsense. It's essentially just like keyboard smash with some like accents, and like it's being sold as if it's imported wine. And she's like, look, whether or not the wine inside the bottle is good or not is like not the question. She was just like, if you're paying for French wine, like get actual French wine. It's just to that level. Like you can basically just put like nonsense on a label, and if it looks vaguely French, people will pay a high price for it.
Yeah,
I actually
and
think
again, this has
boat
been
is kind of cool. I'm not gonna lie, guys. I'm like looking at photos of this. I'm like, when has LVMH done anything this spectacular for the French? Like, why does all the money get to go to China? Like, we want our boat here too.
If it was an actual boat, that'd be cool. They should build a boat in the Seine.
But
It's
the
that big.
inside of it is pretty spectacular. It looks like Versailles, but like new
Yeah.
and colorful.
Weird, really weird. But you can't build stuff like that in the West anymore. Only in China.
Yep.
Even if you're a Western company.
It's all
But
those goddamn construction worker unions, isn't it?
But yeah, then the other side of what you're saying, Rachel, about how big this all is in China is that this has been extraordinarily beneficial for the French economy. And
Absolutely.
French wine industry is built off of export to, especially to Asia now.
I mean,
And,
Nancy, remember in
yeah.
Dijon when we like there was that like weekly bus import of Chinese tourists that would get off at the Gare de Dijon, and they'd go and
Oh,
like
yeah.
it was just huge. So even a small city like Dijon really benefits from this marketing and this branding.
Yeah, well, you know what? Another French city that benefited from the reputation of the kind of growing luxury industry of France was particularly during the 1940s. It was Vichy.
Oh,
So
yikes.
yeah, so let's move on to some more modern history of Louis Vuitton. In particular, some questionable, interesting developments during World War II, when the Louis Vuitton company um, definitely collaborated with the Nazis during the German occupation of France, and a lot of this was revealed and written about by this French journalist Stéphanie Bonvicini, who in 2004 published a book called Louis Vuitton: A French Saga, and basically it was kind of a comprehensive history of Louis Vuitton and like essentially the Louis Vuitton dynasty and the company through the ages. But one particular element that was very little discussed and talked about previously was the fact that members of the Vuitton family actively aided the Vichy government, which was led by Marshal Philippe Pétain at the time, and essentially increased their wealth from kind of continuing and even furthering their business affairs with Nazi Germany. So from historical archives, the author Bonvicini discovered that Louis Vuitton had a store on the ground floor of a fabulous property in Vichy, the Hôtel du Parc, which was where Pétain had set up his collaborationist puppet government. And while a lot of other shopkeepers, including some kind of luxury jewelers, for example, were shut down, Vuitton was one of the only luxury brands that was allowed to stay during the war. And Bonvicini, the author, she said she talked to surviving family members of the Vuitton family and found that Vuitton's grandson, Gaston, who was the wartime head of the company, had explicitly instructed his eldest son, Henri, to forge links with the Pétain regime in order to keep the business going. And Henri, so the great grandson of Louis Vuitton, was a regular at the local cafe that was frequented by the Gestapo and was one of the first Frenchmen to be decorated by the Nazi backed government for his loyalty and his effort for the Nazi regime. And that's
Interesting.
not even the most damaging
Damn.
allegation. Yeah, the perhaps the worst and also kind of the funniest one is that the Vuitton family set up a factory dedicated during the war, dedicated to producing artifacts glorifying the Maréchal Philippe Pétain, including more than 2,500 busts, a fact that was not mentioned in any of its business records.
We've all
To be
made
fair to
mistakes.
Louis Vuitton, they're not the only brand that in France that was collaborationist. I mean, Coco
No.
Chanel. Also, we're not talking about Chanel today, but because it's not an LVMH brand, it's one of the few independent houses. But Coco Chanel herself is accused of doing essentially wartime intelligence for the Nazis in Paris. So there's a blood on a lot of people's hands for this.
And what's the German brand that actually designed? Oh, Hugo Boss.
Hugo
Right? They actually
Boss,
designed the Nazi uniforms.
Yeah,
Yeah,
which
and
I'm
this
not
might be
gonna
a bit
lie.
obvious here, but like I think I should just mention that the Maréchal Pétain was the chef d'État or the head of state under Vichy.
Yep. But so basically, the author said that part of this spectacular collaboration was due to the family's obsession with the survival of the company, and part was down to the fact that there was a certain sympathy with the regime's right-wing views. She also said, interestingly, that at first, when she set out to write the book, LVMH was at first extremely keen on the book and promised to promote it, ensure it was published in English and Japanese. But once she started kind of getting into the research and in particular started asking about Louis Vuitton's wartime activities, she was told that company documents for the years 1930 to 1945 had conveniently been destroyed in a fire.
Oops.
And
I
she said
guarantee
that
there's
their
no
attitude
Japanese
changed completely
translation.
the moment that she mentioned the warriors, from being very helpful to not responding to any emails, solicitations, questions at all.
Damn.
Yeah, that kind of funnily reminds me of how the German TV show Dark, how they it's for our listeners, it's like it's about time travel, and the way the time travel portal works is that you go 33 years back or forward in time, and so they very conveniently made it so that the time periods you could go to were the late 2010s, the late 80s, the 1950s, and then the 1920s. So between
Casual.
1920 and 1950 something, it was like, nope, we don't go there.
That's so convenient for a German time traveler. I mean, damn, they
Yeah.
got lucky on that one.
Yeah, and so did Louis Vuitton with these very fortuitously destroyed records in a fire between 1930 and 1945.
Well, and
But
again, it just points to this whole idea of how it's still a business making venture at the end of the day. You got to do what you got to do to make money if that's your whole goal as a profit seeking company, right? So if the way that you make money is by cozying up with the Nazis, then that's what you do, right? The same way that, as we'll talk about later, right? If what you need to do is labor exploitation, like they all do it, whether it's luxury or whether it's dirt cheap fast fashion from China, So it's like nobody's hands are clean, much, least of all these like luxury companies.
yep. So we get after the war more or less into kind of the more recent history of Louis Vuitton, and essentially them becoming the LVMH brand. So essentially, again, they continued expanding after the war. They including internationally, they became a multinational in the 70s. Then they went public in the 80s. And in 1987, they essentially fusioned with so Louis Vuitton. After going public, they essentially fusioned with Moët Hennessy, and that's how they became LVMH. And then it was in a couple of years later, in 1989, that Bernard Arnault, who you guys talked about on your media episode, I believe, like
Yes,
one of
we
the
love him.
yeah, friend of the pod, Bernard Arnault, one of the
Sponsor
richest
sponsor of the
fans
pod.
yes, one of the
Moral
richest
We're
and
all
not
fans
getting
in
those
financial.
Bernard bucks.
the world. He essentially made a pretty aggressive acquisition of stock in LVMH, and he became a majority. How do you call this? Actionnaire majoritaire.
Majority holder.
Shareholder.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
became a majority shareholder with 42% of its stock. And then again, continued kind of expanding into until essentially LVMH became one of, if not the most, the biggest and most important kind of luxury groups in the world, expanding its production. So we're far from the kind of early days of just essentially luxury travel goods. They have like pret-a-porter fashion collections. They have uh, accessories, shoes. They have jewelry, perfumes, etc., etc.
When it's really under Bernard Arnault that it becomes, like Nancy was just saying, this absolutely enormous company. And it's really when they start pursuing this growth model of, if we really want to become large and profitable beyond just, doing what, the original outset kind of business of Louis Vuitton, which is making leather goods, right? You really need to expand into other industries and you need to make luxury more accessible, right? Because by definition, luxury is, only really accessible to a small group of people, right? Like true luxury, the like if you know kind of luxury, right? But if you really want to make a lot of money, you need to be selling things to people at all price points from all different cultures, marketing in a way that is kind of accessible to them. So it's also the 80s and 90s when, LVMH starts expanding into these kind of, let's say, lower cost or more accessible industries like cosmetics, but it's still going to be more affordable and make them more money because again, like every teenage girl, I'm pretty sure most teenage girls have shopped at Sephora. Like you can go there and get something relatively affordable, but the way that it's marketed, the way that it's sold is like this is true quality, this is true luxury, even if you're just buying like a 10 euro lip gloss.
Yeah, it's interesting. It seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not a fashionista, as we already established, but there seems to have been some change at some point between this "if you know" thing to
Mm-hmm.
the whole point of these modern luxury brands being that yes, you know,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like the whole idea is even if you can't afford to have a Louis Vuitton bag or a Gucci, whatever, everyone's heard of it. Everyone recognizes it.
Right. Well, and then like the fashion industry, you go through these waves of like, logomania, right? And like logos being very popular and then where people kind of get sick of them and they start to be seen as tacky, right? And
Hmm.
so I don't know, Nancy, if you had anything more you wanted to say about the history of LVMH and Bernard Arnault
No,
or
I think we basically kind of arrive at to present day, and exactly what you guys were
okay.
saying about like kind of how I think it's no coincidence that Bernard Arnault is both owns like a lot of the French media industry and like so many different newspapers, magazines, etc., and also LVMH, because also LVMH is the biggest advertiser in French media. So like
Yeah.
Mhm.
essentially a lot of those media outlets revenue comes from LVMH advertising, and
Mhm.
that is very much in that logic of making luxury almost more of a brand, like it's almost like, yeah, like France is a brand advertising for Louis Vuitton
Well,
today,
and Louis
right?
Vuitton is a brand advertising for France,
France,
right?
yeah.
And
And
to
you
pause
know,
for a moment on
yeah,
Bernard Arnault and what you were talking about with the media there. So we talked about him in this context on our episode on the French media, which everyone who hasn't heard that should go listen to. I think that's a great episode we did. But he's like, he owns Le Parisien, which is one of the biggest French newspapers, and it's one of the most like politically neutral, apolitical ones. And he's sort of less vocally right wing than most of the other media owning billionaires in France. But he has been known to use the advertising weight of LVMH to shut down any criticism of him. There was this famous case where, what was it? Yeah, hold on.
Is it the one with the film Merci Patron?
I'm trying to remember which.
no?
So Libération, the center-left newspaper in 2012. There was when François Hollande came into power, and at that time he said he was going to do this like wealth tax on the very richest people, and all the billionaires freaked out. A lot of them moved out of France or said they were going to, including Bernard Arnault, who got Belgian citizenship and moved to Belgium. And Libération printed a cover that said "Casse-toi, riche con," with a picture of Arnault.
nice.
Like, screw off, rich idiot. And as a result of
I
this,
feel like
he
con is
pulled.
stronger than idiot
Yeah, you
for
think
the
so?
listeners.
Yeah.
I would say like
How would you
asshole
translate
at
it?
least.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like it's both idiot and asshole. Like it's like you're stupid asshole.
Fuck
Yeah.
off, rich asshole. Something like that. It's a pretty crazy. I mean, it's awesome that they did that, but not something.
French listeners,
Libération-
tell us what you think.
Yeah. Yes, please do. But anyway, as a result of that, LVMH withdrew all advertising from Libération, and it like caused a crisis because they're, as you said, they're the biggest advertiser in the French media. They did a similar thing to Le Monde in 2017 over the Paradise Papers thing, which Bernard Arnault was shockingly implicated in. And Le Monde reported this, and again, LVMH sort of like held the advertising revenue over them until they stopped reporting on it, basically. So it's pretty crazy. But the other thing I wanted to say about him is that, so he was when we did our French media episode, he was the richest man in the world. He's not anymore because, stocks go up and down. LVMH has not been doing great stock-wise recently, but he's still the Forbes list is currently saying he's the 5th richest man in the world. But what really strikes me looking at this list is, of the top 10, there's only 2 who aren't American, and there's only 2 who aren't tech billionaires, and they're the same people. It's Bernard Arnault, and then number 9 is Amancio Ortega, the Spanish owner of Zara.
Well, and it really gets to this. It's funny that it's Inditex and LVMH, right? That provide the European and representation, because it's really Europe, right? So in general, but specifically France, but I would say broadly speaking, Europe really benefits from this, again, association that, anything that is European is inherently luxurious or high quality or good, right? Like even like Zara and Inditex are fast fashion, and yet the branding, also it almost gives it this leeway where, like, to tie back to the Shein thing, and I'll get back to that later, right? This idea that, like, why are we throwing such a hissy fit over Shein when Zara and other fast fashion European brands are, guilty of a lot of the same things as Shein, right? But what's so interesting to me too with the fashion industry, and specifically LVMH, but basically you can trace any brand, right, throughout these eras, is kind of how their strategy and how even just the look and the aesthetic that they're pursuing really mirrors what's going on in the broader culture and society, politically, economically, etc., right? So it's like, at the start, when you're in the absolute monarchy in France, you have this really over-the-top luxurious French, luxury and aesthetic, right? It's that like really gaudy gold, over-the-top luxurious atmosphere of Versailles. And then during the revolution, this is really like demonized and really targeted, right? Like the sans-culottes, right? The way that they showed who they were as the sans-culottes, who were these like urban kind of radical, urban working class radicals during the French Revolution, was by not wearing the culotte style of trousers, but wearing full length pants, right? Or the certain hats that they wore, the red hats, right? And then even as you get to the 20th century, right, with the post-war kind of economic boom, the Trente Glorieuses and the expansion of kind of the middle class and the kind of modern bourgeoisie, having these labels, having a monogrammed Louis Vuitton bag or having a Gucci monogram on your clothes, right, or on your leather goods is a way of showing off, especially in the 80s when you get to this like greed is good, like beginning of like neoliberalism, growth at all costs culture, which again, that is the kind of soup that, Bernard Arnault comes out of, right, in the 80s, this like growth at all costs, greed is good mentality. That is also when logos are at their biggest and everyone wants to have the right brand, the right logo, the Armani suit, Armani also an LVMH property, right? So, that is the early era of LVMH. But then, as you get to the 2008 recession, right, all of a sudden when people are not doing well economically, and you're kind of seeing that, reflect itself today with the way the economy is going, people start turning away from a lot of these like over the top loud luxury brands, like Louis Vuitton, right? So it's in the 2000s and like 2010s when Louis Vuitton starts to be seen as a little bit more, I would say, tacky. Like, at least, I don't know what you think, Nancy, but as a teenage girl in that era already by like, high school, I did not, and then, seeing the like wealthy people that I knew around me, like nobody was wearing Louis Vuitton. Like nobody
No.
was like pining after those bags,
No, if
It was
anything, I feel like,
like
yeah, it was definitely more of a kind of tacky thing to have, usually like a fake Louis Vuitton bag, right? Like the Louis Vuitton or whatever with the slightly different monogram. That was a thing, I feel like, for
Yeah.
like basic bitches in high school in like circa 2011 in Bulgaria.
Well, right, because that's also, again, no surprises here. That's when China starts to become really this like industrial powerhouse. And the fake industry is still huge here in China, but it was especially huge back then. I mean, I can take the metro 30 minutes and there's a huge underground fake market. And Louis Vuitton is all over it because they're incredibly easy to make copies and fakes of. Because again, what they sell is honestly, getting into the fashion side of it, what they sell, especially in their leather goods, is really not that impressive. And, obviously I think a lot of people can understand paying a higher price for something that's purely made out of leather, right? Like leather is expensive, but a lot of what they sell and a lot of their most popular products are this coated canvas. So basically what they do is you'll get like a sturdy canvas and you'll put this like shellac over it essentially that makes it kind of smooth and like waterproof and sturdy, but it's not real leather, but it does have the brand on it. And so that's a lot of when people are buying Louis Vuitton bags and leather goods, they're really not getting 100% leather. And it's, decent-ish quality. Like I would say Louis Vuitton has, compared to some other brands, maintained a somewhat good level of quality in terms of like your bag is not going to like immediately fall apart as soon as you get it, but you're also really just paying for the brand. You're not paying for craftsmanship for Louis Vuitton, right? And it really reflects essentially Bernard Arnault and LVMH's strategy from like the 90s, 2000s onward, which is kind of selling the brand more than actually a high quality product.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like that's also reflected in like all of these different like sponsorship deals that they've been doing. Like they've been the primary sponsor of the America's Cup
Mm,
for a while now. And actually last year, the America's Cup, which was hosted in Barcelona, there was a kind of a controversy with Louis Vuitton there, where essentially they kind of opaquely privatized UNESCO historic heritage
oh
for a
shit.
branded event. Like basically they the LVMH organized as part of their America's Cup kind of sponsorship
Mm,
an event inside the
Park Güell.
Antoni Gaudi Gardens, yeah, the Park Güell
mm,
in Barcelona, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Despite the fact that normally public regulations strictly limit the site's activities to scientific and educational purposes. And uh, not only that, but also a week before the show, the technical contractors who were kind of setting up the event were found to have destroyed the wall of a protected stairway and a stone ball. So they
oh
like they
shoot.
damaged essentially public property and like UNESCO World Heritage um, for the purpose of this branded event, and it was unclear. Like I think there were, there was a lot of outcry, especially from kind of neighborhood organizations that already kind of have a lot of um, tensions with the kind of over tourism in the area. But so there was a big public outcry. It was unclear whether the company, like whether Louis Vuitton or like LVMH actually paid to privatize the site, or if they were kind of able to essentially present it as some sort of like for educational or whatever purposes, which it clearly wasn't. It was a branded it was a branded event, and also the part of why like those kind of neighborhood activists were so pissed off was that apparently around like the days like immediately before the event and the day of the event, the neighboring schools were forced to close earlier. They were denied their after school activities, and the access of families were limited with mandatory ID checks. Like that, essentially, the people who live around had to like were limited in their ability to get from their apartments to schools and back because of the event. And yeah, and I think that's just kind of one example of Louis Vuitton kind of using the veneer of some sort of kind of public interest, whatever,
Like a
event
cultural
to
institution.
cultural, exactly, like kind of cultural events and the cultural institution for the purpose of essentially just marketing, right?
Yeah, well, and that's
And
really what. Sorry.
and monetizing European heritage, I was just going to say, because
Absolutely.
I feel like that's a big part of their branding is, and the Europe luxury in general branding is, Spanish architectural heritage, Parisian street, old Italian village,
Yeah.
right? It's that like history is turned into a marketing tool, and
Yeah, and right now there's the 100-year anniversary of the Exposition Universelle des Arts Décoratifs in Paris, and yeah, LVMH is all over that shit. Like they're organizing all these events at their flagship stores and whatnot, but like under the guise of this is an art exhibit. Like it's literally listed um, in all those kind of uh, websites for cultural activities to do this weekend in Paris.
Well,
have
to
you ever
be
been to their
fair,
museum, the Fondation Louis Vuitton?
I have, and
No, I
I
haven't.
was about to say, to be fair, there is artistry in fashion. Okay, so like I'm not, I think a lot of the time, and I'm saying this as like a defender of fashion, a defender of high fashion, even of like haute couture. There is really a lot of artistry, a lot of skill, as much I would say as any other art form, right? And even to be fair to these LVMH brands, we've been focusing a lot on Louis Vuitton, but they also own a lot of other fashion houses that are considered to be like genuinely high quality and artistic, right? So like an example is Phoebe Philo. She's a designer and she was actually the head of Celine, which is another one of these LVMH owned fashion houses, another kind of historical French fashion house. And then she is a very talented designer and she was really credited with taking Celine into like a new direction and kind of freshening up the brand and bringing a lot of interesting designs. And now she has her own fashion house named after her, Phoebe Philo, also under LVMH. And she is, again, considered one of these like top level, really like artistic designers, right? So or Loewe, for example. Loewe is a Spanish fashion house that, again, is, considered to be very high quality, very artistic, much more so than actually the brand Louis Vuitton under the LVMH umbrella. So it's not like it's all bullshit and you're literally paying for any LVMH brand is just crap and you're just paying for a brand, right? Like there is genuine artistry that happens in this industry as well as in other, luxury, let's say, conglomerates or fashion houses. But the thing is, because the marketing is so successful, and that's really, in my opinion, what sets LVMH apart is this just aggressive expansion and this aggressive marketing that really does capitalize on both the idea of exclusivity and luxury and just this like European heritage, right? And almost selling this idea that like if you buy this, you're kind of in a way getting a piece of that like bygone era of like European aristocracy and beauty, right? And kind of to get back what I was saying earlier about how fashion tends to go in cycles, where in some eras when the economy is really booming, like in the 80s or the 2000s, people love logos and people love showing off their brands, and that like, I've got a Louis Vuitton, or I've got a this, I've got a that. But then in other eras when the economy is contracting, people start to prefer much more minimalistic and designs, and it becomes, less positively associate, like people start having a less positive association with kind of showing off and flaunting which brands you've got, right? And so kind of to tie it into the more modern controversies with some of the brands and kind of what's going on with Shein as well is, did you guys ever hear about during COVID the quiet luxury trend?
No.
None of you?
You're-
Okay,
you're,
wow.
you're
Shocked to
asking,
learn
you're
I
asking
had
me and
no
Patrick
idea
if we've
about
heard about a
this.
luxury trend.
Or about a trend generally on the internet.
So I was mainly asking Nancy, to be completely honest, but it's okay. I will explain it. So basically, during COVID, as we all know, right, the economy was not doing amazing at first. People were either losing their jobs or on furlough, and everyone's also spending a lot of time at home on TikTok, right? The classic kind of when you bring up COVID in a show, like what everyone fucking says, I feel like I'm saying this for the like 80 bajillionth time that I've heard it, like among other people. But, that's truly what was happening. And a kind of something that TikTok is unique for, I would say, as a social media, is you'll have these trends that pop up of like the trend itself is about an aesthetic. So it's not like, oh, buy this one specific product or do this specific thing. I mean, that does exist on TikTok as well. But it's very similar to like Nancy, one I know you're more familiar with, the dark academia aesthetic, right?
Yeah.
And one of these that pops up during COVID in particular is this quiet luxury aesthetic. So this idea that, real rich people with real taste, they're not wearing the Gucci belts and the, Louis Vuitton handbags that, again, had become more popular in the mid 2010s, thanks to like Kardashians and kind of this a little bit, in my opinion, tacky or popular culture moment that we were having in the 2010s. In the 2020s, specifically during COVID, there's a little bit of a backlash to it, right? And it's like, oh, if you really want to look luxury, you've got to wear quiet luxury, right? I think the thing that a lot of people were saying was money talks, wealth whispers, right? Like stupid shit like that. And to a certain extent, it's true, right? That like genuinely wealthy people a lot of the time are not wearing the same kind of what people would contrast as loud luxury brands like Gucci, Louis, whatever. But it especially becomes popular because of the TV show Succession, which did any of you guys watch that?
Yes.
Right? And so in Succession, it's supposed to be the, example of a very wealthy kind of high power family. And, the moment in that show that went kind of viral, the ludicrously capacious handbag. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that.
Oh my goodness. Okay, well there's like
The
a
show is
scene
a
in
total
which
blur for me.
I didn't see it.
so there was a scene that went a bit viral in this era where a woman is holding, they're at some event, I forget, and she's holding a handbag with the Burberry plaid on it, right? So Burberry is another one of these brands that, they have their signature plaid and it's plastered over a lot of stuff, and that's seen as loud luxury and kind of tacky again. And the guy in the show, he makes this comment that it's a ludicrously capacious handbag, right? Being like, basically putting this woman down for wearing something that is trying to announce itself as luxury. And the costume design on this show used a brand for a lot of the costuming called Loro Piana. Have you guys ever heard of Loro Piana?
Nope.
Nope.
Oh, wow. Okay. So Loro Piana, this is going to get into the controversies. So Loro Piana is actually owned by LVMH. It's, again, a part of the conglomerate. And they are really synonymous. They became super viral in this moment of being synonymous with quote unquote quiet luxury, right? This like, they don't have any loud branding, you don't see a logo on anything, just looking at it off the street, you wouldn't really think of it as anything super special, but it's extremely expensive, extremely high quality and beautiful clothes. I mean, it might not be your taste, but it's not crap, right? Like it's not the coated canvas Louis Vuitton bag. Like, their clothes and shoes are very, very high quality. And so it becomes viral in this era where, people associate it with succession and quiet luxury and kind of trying to copy this look. But again, a brand like Loro Piana, which is actually originally an Italian brand, founded in 1924, one would assume that when you are paying extremely high prices for this gorgeous, extremely high quality clothing, that it is completely ethical, right? Or one would hope.
Presumably not, though, because you're rich as hell and you're buying something like that's supposed to be the result of exploitation.
I mean, everything is the result of exploitation, right? But, at the end of the day, someone's making a profit. That being said, though, I think there's a general idea that people have where the more expensive something is, the better quality is. The more expensive it is, the more ethical it likely is, right? The idea being that, oh, of course something you buy on Shein is unethical because if you're buying something for $2, a t-shirt for $2, well, there's no way that the person who made that t-shirt is making more than like 10 cents as their daily salary, right? So
I'm
I think
sure
a lot
the working conditions are awful in these places, but I would assume at least mass like manufacturing of like a t-shirt or whatever is a largely automated process with terribly exploited workers on the supply, like on the manufacturing like, chain or whatever. But I'm just imagining kind of just images of people hand sewing this, stuff. Like, I don't know. To me, it's not inherently obvious that the really expensive luxury stuff is supposed to be like less exploitative.
I think the assumption a lot of people have is, well, by necessity, if you are paying more money, hopefully, or not by necessity, but I think most people assume you're paying more money, therefore the person making it is getting a better salary or maybe being treated a bit better, right? So to shout out another French luxury house, Hermès, which we don't really have time to get too deep into their details, but Hermès is actually one of these French luxury fashion brands, houses that is known for having, actually producing from step A to step Z, everything in-house, everything in Europe. They have highly trained artisans that go through these long apprenticeships. They're unionized. They get profit sharing. It takes over a week to make just like one handbag. It's incredibly intricate process. And like, it is an art. And I don't want to like downplay the idea that like, making clothing is an art. Like, I'm assuming none of you have ever tried to sew anything from scratch. I'm assuming.
I have sewn a tote bag.
Ooh,
a few
okay.
years ago. Yeah, I have a sewing machine, but I was one of those. I feel like quarter life crisis hobbies where I was like, I need to have more hobbies, and it never went much further than that one tote bag. But I still have that tote bag, and I still use it. So it's handmade, handcrafted, premium European
Niche
quality.
Yes. Well, and like I have sewn garments before. My mom is very good at sewing. Shout out Karen. She's really good at it, and she taught me how when I was younger. And I've sewn things with her. But I had this experience once of it was during COVID also, where I was bored. I wanted to make a skirt, so I get the pattern, I get the fabric, I do all this, I measure it, etc. And then I fucked up, and it was the wrong size, and I went through all this effort, spent all this money, and it wasn't even that good, right? So my point being, there is an artistry, there is a craftsmanship that goes into designing, cutting patterns, sewing, etc. So again, like once you try to make something for yourself from scratch, you actually understand not only how much work, but how much artistry and skill and craftsmanship goes into these like really beautiful garments. But with Loro Piana, this brand that became majorly popular, not popular in the sense that people were buying from it, but well known during COVID for this quiet luxury trend. They are a LVMH brand that actually is kind of doing the exact same exploitative labor practices and honestly treating people really shitty in the same way that I think a lot of people assume a Shein is, despite the fact that Loro Piana sells, for example, this finest and most expensive wool, the vicuñas. I'm saying the Spanish wrong. Vicuñas wool. It's this like incredibly rare wool that is produced in Peru from a special animal that is kind of like a llama that only exists in Peru. And they have a sweater that is made exclusively from this vicuñas wool. And they sell the sweater for $9,000 retail.
My God.
Okay. Yeah. So it's like incredibly expensive garment. Okay. And yet the indigenous people in Peru, the villages that their entire livelihood is shearing the wool from this animal, they're only paying them like $300 a shear. And there's people in the villages. There's a Bloomberg article, a really good Bloomberg expose of this, where this is basically the only livelihood that these villages have, and because Loro Piana basically has a monopoly on this vicunia's wool market, they pay them extremely low prices, and a lot of the people in the village are working for free, essentially helping shear and raise these animals, because that is like the only livelihood and money that their village is getting.
Something that like you talking about this made me like think about is to me it's so weird that people think that like somehow people have been convinced that ready-wear is luxury.
What
Like,
do you mean?
Well, you would think like because all these brands start out originally as like a dude who does something for you. So what's luxury about it is there's a guy who is going to lose a week of his life to make your underwear. That is the luxury. The luxury is that this man you get a piece of his time to make your clothing. Whereas all this stuff is ready-wear. It is being manufactured in like a, sometimes they'll use hand labor to, like do like less industrial production. Hermes is a great example, but it is still like a supply chain that
Absolutely
operates like any normal capitalist business. And what you're getting is not special because it's not being like made to your size, right? It's just like medium, large, normal like that. And you would think that would be what makes it luxury. The fact that you can't buy it off the rack.
Well, that is still luxury. That does still exist. It just, if you're only doing that, you're not going to make a huge profit, right? So that's why these LVMH type fashion houses, they'll basically have a like ready to wear line, and then they'll also have their couture line, which is the more higher actual luxury, like you were just describing, where it's made specifically for you, made in incredibly small numbers by the designers and artisans themselves, versus the Loro Piana or the Louis Vuitton brands. And even Louis Vuitton itself has a ready-to-wear and an haute couture section. So even in that, the accessible luxury that we're talking about, again, it's all, like you were just saying, branding that is more accessible to more amounts of people as a way for the company to make more money. But there still genuinely is this like actual luxury that, again, it's like the 1% that really is getting that stuff. And then the rest of the population that has some disposable income and wants to feel wealthy, wants to feel like they're a part of this moneyed aristocratic class, they're the ones who are buying the either crappy quality Louis Vuitton handbags or overpriced, cashmere sweaters from Loro Piana. Just the other funny kind of example of this that I wanted to bring up is, you guys, have you heard of like Christian Dior? I assume that's another one of these famous ones.
Yeah,
so Christian Dior
didn't Hidalgo buy some Dior I think she bought some Dior on the state dime.
Yes, that was one
classic.
of her note de frais, like her recent controversy was that, I think she bought some luxury Dior dress for supposedly an event that she had to appear at, but it's like, come on, you're the mayor of Paris. Do you actually need several €1,000 Dior dress for just like an event?
Right.
And
Well,
she said she was doing it because she had to like represent French, fashion or whatever, but she also bought Burberry.
well, and that's again another thing that politicians, especially female politicians or wives of politicians, will do is they'll make an effort to like wear brands and designers from their country, right? Like Kate Middleton is also very famous for basically exclusively wearing British designers. But the reason I brought up with Dior was it's also an LVMH fashion house. And
It was one of the early kind of very aggressive acquisitions of Bernard Arnault. Like he became known as the Terminator after this
wow.
one acquisition. It was a company, I forget the name, that essentially owned kind of Dior that he acquired, and in
Lord.
addition to a bunch of other kind of pretty hostile takeovers that earned him that
Right.
nickname.
Well, and the thing is, if you're going to sell this luxury branding, but you need to mass produce, like you were bringing up, Patrick, right? Like at the end of the day, you were going to have to start, industrializing and like cutting costs somewhere. And so both Loro Piana, but also Dior, have also come under hot water in the last couple of years for essentially what they'll do is, so this happened to Loro Piana and their factories were put under court administration for labor exploitation in Italy, where basically a Chinese worker, so, China tie-in again, claimed he was beaten by his boss after demanding payment of back wages. And then when they investigated, they found these factories that were essentially being run by Chinese citizens in Italy, so that the Loro Piana shit that you're getting still says made in Italy, made in Europe, right? But it's being run by these Chinese citizens who own these subcontractor companies, and they'll run the factory, illegally built. They house the workers in these dormitories and unsanitary conditions, and they'll essentially import Chinese nationals as imported cheap labor illegally. Okay, so they're not there on work visas. They're not under European contracts or French or Italian labor law, breaking, workplace health and safety standards, and none of them have residence permits, so they're just flagrantly breaking the law. So the factories that produce, some of the factories that produce for Loro Piana were put under Italian court administration for this in, I believe, 2023, or no, actually, this was quite recently. This was 2025. So that's Loro Piana, right? They're, shafting these poor indigenous people in Peru for the wool, and then forcing exploited Chinese labor in Italy to do it so they can still keep the made in Italy tag on it. But the crazier one, or the one that just really blew up on social media, because you don't see a lot about the Loro Piana one on social media, but the one that really went viral is the Dior scandal, where similarly, right, they were producing, they were outsourcing to these subcontractors who are Chinese, and they will open these factories, again, in Italy, producing under these really extremely unsafe conditions with extremely low pay, workers who do not have their documents in order, right, from China, but in Italy. And the thing that they were producing for Dior that really became scandalous when it was, publicly announced due to this investigation was this Dior book tote. So are you guys familiar with the Dior book tote, one of their bags?
No.
I will share my screen again so that you guys can see it.
Yeah, no, I'm very familiar with this.
So this is the Dior book tote.
Several.
So it's not even... So actually, I'm not even going to say anything. I just want to get your guys' live reactions. Like, what do we think of this when I show you it?
Looks like I could have bought it on Shein.
Yeah.
So you can actually
it's
buy
fugly.
You can buy some faithful copies and fakes very easily here, because it's literally, like, so you know how I mentioned earlier the coated canvas that LV will do, where at the very least it's not just straight up canvas, it's coated canvas. This is literally just fucking woven canvas. Like, if you see these things in person, it's just like a highly structured tote bag. There's not even a zipper, zero leather at all. Like, it is literally just a fucking tote bag. And I want you guys to guess how much money they were selling this bag for. Don't Google it.
I think if I saw this in the real world, I would assume that it was just what they give you for free to take your products out of the Dior store. But probably they're selling this for, like, I don't know, 5,000 euros.
Okay.
No, I would say 800.
I don't know. I have no
Nancy?
I have no metric for these things.
To me, it looks like one of those shitty kind of bags that they sell at souvenir shops in Paris.
Ooh.
You know, like the ones with all the little miniature Eiffel Towers and stuff. So I'm gonna say, no, actually, my real guess is 2,000.
Okay, so Nancy's the closest. They were selling it for 2,600 euros.
Okay.
And I'll also note, this bag, because it's literally just fucking canvas, it's a tote bag, is like one of the also most commonly copied and like faked bags that you'll see here in China. But again, because people don't know how things are spelled, they'll just walk around with, it sounds like Kirsty Droid or some bullshit on it. And it cracks me up every time. Like, every time I see a fake one of these. But it's not even, like, Dior has some genuinely beautiful bags that are selling for 5,000 euros plus. Whether or not you think it's worth that is irrelevant, right? At the very least, it's like, those bags are like real leather, or they've got like some intricate beading or whatever that you could assume takes some more money and time to produce. But these Christian Dior book totes were being produced by these, again, overworked, underpaid, unsanitary condition, living in unsanitary conditions, poor, Chinese workers, imported to Europe so that it can still say that it was made in Europe. And it only cost them like $57 to produce this bag, right? So
This
you
is
have
what a genuinely good tote bag looks like, my friends.
exactly. No, but
Should
it's
we
just
explain this to our listeners, or are we cutting this one out?
yeah. What is?
Explain.
I mean, it's
What is
CGT.
of course.
Yeah, this is a local union tote bag that I got the other weekend, and it has just as much quality as this Christian Dior thing. And because it doesn't have like the hard handles and all that, it's actually much more lightweight. So it's actually a lot more practical.
There you go. But this this Dior book tote scandal went really, really viral because people were like, "Oh my god, like how like." And you can go on YouTube and or TikTok and find videos of people talking about this where they're like, when I'm buying something luxury, whether it's a genuinely wealthy person or just a middle class person who's been saving up for this stuff, the assumption that a lot of people are entering into this, misguided as it may be, is if I'm paying 2,600 euros for this, right, that probably doesn't take very long or much effort to produce, I would at least hope that the person making this is making minimum wage. And you again assume, oh, it says made in France, made in Italy, therefore, probably a minimum of labor standards were being met and probably a minimum of regulations were being followed. But until one of these brave Chinese workers went and complained to the Italian authorities, this was happening in broad daylight in Italy, and it just nobody knew about it, or very few people in the public knew about it. Which kind of brings me back to the original point I made with Shein and why I kind of tried to tie the two topics together, which is that, again, all of the criticisms that get made of Shein or just Chinese brands in general, the same shit is happening with these extremely expensive, made in France, made in Europe brands, not to mention, for example, Zara, right? Zara is also fast fashion, and it's also produced under awful conditions. Just instead of being in China, a lot of their production happens in Turkey, where recently a 16-year-old worker was killed at work for, unsafe working conditions. So, even in the kind of near-shoring, right, not China, but we're in Turkey, we're close to Europe, still you've got child working, child labor happening. You've got people being completely underpaid. You've got, really unsafe working conditions. There was also recently a huge fire in a factory in Turkey that exported primarily to Europe. So, this I think it's just yes, are there shitty labor practices happening in China that I do not support? Absolutely. But the idea that, by just completely banning or avoiding anything made in China, you're avoiding this exploitation and, environmental degradation, that's just a fool's errand, right? It's impossible, essentially. And vice versa, the idea that anything made in China is automatically bad quality, whereas anything made in Europe is good quality and worth the money, is also just totally untrue.
Have you ever bought anything from Shein, Rachel?
Shein? No. I mean, again, in China, nobody's bought anything. One, Shein doesn't exist in China.
Really?
But two, there are brands and factories that basically produce exclusively to export to Europe and North America. Those, pedophile dolls are not being sold in China. They're being sold abroad because they know that's where the goddamn demand is, right? And that's where they know, what's going to happen to us if we sell it in Europe? Nothing. If we sell it in China, the state's going to crack the whip, right? Or for example, these low quality products that get sold on Shein or Temu in Europe and America, it's because American and European, consumers have come to associate China with low quality. So if you're a Chinese producer trying to export, it's a lot harder to export high quality but more expensive stuff that you've made here in China. Whereas, if you're going to sell something and be open with the fact that it's made in China, you're going to have to sell, shitty stuff, essentially. So, the stuff that's being made for export is very different than what we here in China actually are buying and have access to, on things like Taobao, right? Chinese people primarily shop on this website, Taobao. Or, for example, just another brand or another kind of funny thing is there's a brand called Lily Silk that I actually discovered just through, they'll do these influencer advertising, right? They'll sponsor YouTube videos or whatever. And it's so funny when I ordered from them for the first time actually when I was living in Paris because I wanted real silk, right? Something I really care about. And my ultimate advice for people if they want to be a more ethical fashion consumer is try to, whether or not you can avoid labor exploitation, that's virtually impossible. But what you can do is try to buy like higher quality fibers, natural fibers, take care of your clothes, try to make them last as long as possible, learn how to do things like mending, etc., washing things properly so that you're not just constantly buying new cheap crap from Shein or H&M and actually like wearing and keeping things for a long time. And so when I started that process of trying to buy higher quality stuff, I discovered this, brand Lily Silk that sells 100% silk shirts and things like that at a reasonable price. And I ordered from them and it took like a month to get to me. And I was like, what is going on? And it turns out they're actually from China. China historically famous for producing high quality, wonderful silk. That's like, that goes back hundreds of years, but they go to such great lengths online. Like if you go to their website, any sponsorships they do, absolutely nowhere do they say that they're produced or made in China, because they know as soon as you put China on something, it's associated with low quality, even for something like fucking silk that like is the OG luxury good and that originally came from China, right? So
But what
I
about
just
the
find it hilarious.
exploitation of the moths? Are you okay with that?
I've seen those moths hard at work when we went to Suzhou. Suzhou is one of the silk capitals. I've seen those motherfuckers make them work.
There's actually
You heard
you
it
can
here
get
on the
ultra
Royal
expensive.
Palace podcast, everybody.
You can get ultra expensive ethical silk,
Oh,
vegan
joy.
silk,
Jesus.
in that because
What
there's
could
a
that
way to do
possibly
it.
mean?
Well, I don't know if it's not vegan, but the normal silk production process kills the moths, the silkworms, because they boil
no.
they take all the cocoons, right, which is what the silk
Yeah.
comes from, and they boil them,
Yeah.
which kills the worms, and then they can unwind.
Yeah,
it
and they
from that.
rattle around inside.
Yeah.
At the Museum of Silk in Suzhou, you can shake it and there's a little dead bug in there.
Yeah. But it is actually
a
possible to do
maraca.
this without killing the worms. It's just vastly
know.
more difficult and expensive. But it is
but
possible.
what if
and
the
you
worms
can buy...
start unionizing? We can't have that. That's
Yeah.
a terrible idea.
Not here in China. They can't do that here. Cut that out. No, but like, it's even funny because you're bringing up the ethical silk or vegan leather kind of thing too, which is also hilarious to me because a lot of that shit is, I don't know about ethical silk, but whenever you see something marketed as vegan leather, it's fucking plastic.
Plastic.
It's a petroleum
petro
byproduct.
product.
Like if you
Which
really
is-
care about the environment, get a secondhand leather good. There you can get some really low price, high quality vintage leather goods. I've gotten amazing. I love vintage, especially in Europe where you guys are, it's really easy to find like amazing stuff for really low prices. And all you need to do, go support your local cobbler and get them to fix up the leather, shine it. It'll be looking brand new in no time. Take care of your shoes, get them fixed up, right? Like, I think, if you want to like broaden this conversation of what is real luxury versus cheap crap, what can you do, right? Like, something that's so important is actually valuing and taking care of your stuff and like really valuing the artistry and the work and the effort that goes into any clothing or any fashion product that is made. And I think that's something that in all countries people have really forgotten, including in France, by the way, where most people are shopping at Zara and H&M and Primark and, not to mention Shein, right? So, it's kind of like, honestly, the call is coming from inside the house with regards to, oh my God, no, la France n'est pas à vendre. We're not going to buy this cheap crap from Shein. It's like, no, people already are. And this is also a part of the luxury industry. So it's a deeper issue than just fuck Shein, right?
I did want to say though, and I think this is probably a positive thing, but apparently I heard this from a guy who works for this company, and I've just checked it now. The largest retailer of clothing in France is not Shein, it's not H&M, it's not any of the French brands. It is actually Vinted.
Really?
Yes, which is for people who
That's
don't know,
great.
because you're in the US, where I think they're opening soon, but they don't currently exist. It's a Lithuanian app or online way to sell, used clothing, basically.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, in the US, there's versions of it. Like, there's similar things like Depop or Poshmark. So I doubt that they're the biggest retailers, but that is really cool.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll
Probably
find a
good
way
thing.
to ruin it and somehow turn it into part of the gig economy or something.
LVMH acquisition incoming. I'm calling it for 2026.
Well,
Bernard
it
already
Arnault
kind
is
of
currently
is.
calling the Lithuanian CEO of Vinted.
Hey, that's a big get for a Lithuanian guy.
This is a
Okay, if the
huge gap for
LVMH,
Lithuania.
yeah, I'm sorry, if LVMH is calling and I'm a fucking Lithuanian, I'm picking up that phone call. No disrespect to Lithuania, just a
I
little
mean,
disrespect.
Vinted is kind of like, I mean, obviously I'm all for the secondhand market. Like, I think it's fine and whatever, but like, it is kind of just a little bit silly. Like, I don't really think it's part of a circular economy. Like, I think ideally this stuff would be more like local, more like sharing clothes and like kind of outside of the market. But like, Vinted is just like Amazonization of like the second hand.
It's a lot of
market.
silly amount of shipping with it, and I
Yeah.
feel like
Yeah.
it can also encourage people to just like buy stuff because it makes it easier to resell stuff. But at the same time, I mean, I don't know. Probably on
Well, and
balance, it's better than any of these other
I
things.
feel like the state should just issue you with 5 white shirts, and that's your dotation for like 5 years or whatever. And that's just like how it is.
Turkish military style.
you agree with Mark Zuckerberg on that.
Wait,
No,
what?
it's not
What?
Mark Zuckerberg. It's
It's all those people. They
it's,
all do that.
Steve Jobs, like the the
No, I
cartoon
think Zuckerberg said it
character
at some point
wardrobe.
too.
They
Several
all
of
are,
these-
but
I
the
feel like
OG guy
Zuckerberg. Yeah, I know he no
Well,
longer
no,
does that because
Steve
now he
Jobs.
dresses like
Steve
he's
Jobs is
Dominican.
the OG.
with the
like,
black turtleneck, and then Elizabeth Holmes who imitated that. Yeah.
yes.
But I
I'm
think
just
it was
saying they could be
Zuckerberg
different
who-
colors,
Robust
they can be
icon.
different styles, but like I feel like we just need to determine how much like production of clothing our markets can handle. Like the other day I learned like just to make a single t-shirt, out of cotton, it's an insane amount of water that's consumed or whatever. We just need to cap how much water we're willing to waste on this industry and just say we can't produce any more than that.
Well, and
Yes, that's
kind
why
of
in
to that
Patrick's
point,
People's Republic, it's gonna be 5 T-shirts max per person, 5 identical
Well,
ones. You
honestly-
can,
Wait, no, here,
you can
here.
choose
okay,
the
I
colors
checked
as
this.
long as it's party approved.
I have to check this. I have to say this was Zuckerberg again before he made his recent Dominican streetwear switch as his look. But this is in 2018. The secret that helps Mark Zuckerberg make big choices. Steve Jobs knew it too.
Ugh.
The most successful people know that decision fatigue is the enemy. Here's how to fight it. So basically, his secret is he's got a closet full of the same gray T-shirts and same jeans. And he said in some like interview that he does this so that he doesn't have to think about what he's going to wear, what he's going to eat. There's too many decisions. He needs to be making big decisions.
Yeah, well, that was also why Steve Jobs famously, according to people working with him, was people complained that he smelled bad because like he would, I guess, unlike Mark Zuckerberg, who had conveniently like gotten the same outfit in like 10 or however many
Yeah,
like
Steve
10 or
Jobs
however
just had
many
one.
I'm just like, yeah, Steve Jobs would just frequently wear the same one. He would also like sleep at the office and stuff. So apparently, yeah, he didn't smell very good. But something for us to maybe explore more in depth in a future episode on the French startup nation and maybe how Macron could help France have more of a startup hustle grind set by making every French CEO have that kind of identical cartoon character wardrobe.
I found this data point. It says 2,700 liters of water, which is about equivalent to 2.5 years of someone's drinking water need, is used to just make a single cotton T-shirt.
Well, I feel like, I mean, I know you were maybe kidding about the 5 government-issued T-shirts a year, but even that is too many, to be completely honest, because I think the bigger problem with this
I
is
said
that...
per 5 years. Per 5 years.
Oh, per 5 years. Okay, well then,
Yeah.
One
It's
a
the
year.
5-year plan.
full speed ahead. But genuinely,
Exactly.
I mean, this is markets, and this is just, throughout, again, fashion history, right? The history of commodification and, and shitification, to use a fantastic neologism, right? The fact that, in the past, fashion was very seasonable, and because it was usually more locally produced by an artisan, and you were going shopping with the idea that I'm buying something that I need to last for a long time, like, people just in general used to, even fashionable people, right? Like, even people that were wealthy or that cared about looking good or trends, right? Like, those, like, you would buy something for the long haul. You wouldn't buy a new, outfit every week or every month. I mean, it's truly sickening, some of the shit you see on social media of these fashion hauls of just like buying, piles and piles and piles of just like random crap that people only wear once and then throw out because it falls apart anyway because it's so poor quality, right? Like, as fashion has become more and more commodified, it always has been, but as companies have realized they can make more money by just constantly getting people to buy more shit, and there's always going to be a market for it, that is what leads to, again, these labor exploitation practices. That's what leads to the environmental degradation, right? Is because nobody is thinking, oh, am I buying a t-shirt that I'm going to take care of and wear until it literally falls apart or doesn't fit me anymore? No, people are thinking, oh, I need one with this neckline and that neckline and these different, like, 8 majillion different colors. And like, there needs to be, every single year you need to get new stuff, and every season and every micro season and micro trend, that's ultimately the kind of sin of fast fashion, which, again, I will remind, fast fashion really was originally invented in Europe, right? Like, that is a kind of European innovation that, like many other things, the Chinese companies just kind of like took and like revved up to 100, So really what people should do if they want to be more responsible consumers, right, is, I mean, again, individual action versus like government regulation. I know, Patrick, you're going to get on one of your tangents, but my point being, what anybody can do though is genuinely just like take care of your shit better and like not just constantly be shopping,
and buy things that are repairable, right? Because that's a big problem
Yeah.
too. It's like everything's going to break at some point, but things traditionally were repairable. Your shoes broke, you could repair them, but now many shoes are glued together in a way that's unfixable,
Right.
And a lot of plastic fabrics are like, can never be fixed in a good way. These things are just not made to be repaired. Like
Right. So
everything.
if you have the money, if you have the time, find like real leather shoes that you can take to a cobbler and get repaired. Buy cotton and natural fibers that you can then take to a tailor, and like that tailor can either help, sew it to and kind of tailor it to your measurements, or fix when it has, some damage and wear and tear, right? Like, ultimately, that's the best that anybody can do.
Yeah,
Rachel's-
and one thing that I would also add to that is I feel like since we were talking earlier about kind of the earlier, or like the more 2010s, like kind of flashy, loud brand, whatever, brand image driven marketing of fashion versus since COVID, the more kind of quiet luxury and the more kind of micro trends that we see on TikTok. Like, I feel like another thing is definitely, like, if we're going to talk about any sort of individual action whatsoever, is like, definitely don't like let online micro trends drive your sense of fashion and style and etc. Because like, I think that's another way that, in a very successful one, that these companies have been using to kind of sell more and more, especially to those more kind of younger online audiences, is essentially you would see, like, especially during COVID, like kind of shifting away from selling the brand and selling through having these big, mainstream celebrities, the Kardashians, the red carpet celebrities and whatever, selling you on the brand or the look, to more selling you on the lifestyle. So you've been seeing all these, you mentioned, Rachel, dark academia. So essentially, we're now selling you the aesthetic of, especially very effective during COVID, of being this, kind of high class student in a prestigious liberal arts college or whatever. And in order to get the look, because you're just some kid who's like, stuck at home during the pandemic, you have to buy all these, cashmere sweaters and these whatever tweed blazers, etc. Or like then it moved to the cottagecore aesthetic, then it was another aesthetic, then there was Brat Summer aesthetic, and I feel like I've been seeing kind of a lot of people just like buying more and more of like completely inconsistent items of fashion or like clothing and accessories with one another, which inevitably means like you just consume more and more to go with those micro trends that we've moved towards and away from the more seasonable trends.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rachel,
Well,
I know we've got a lot of high net worth individuals listening, and they may be wondering off of all this. They're shocked to hear that their favorite brands are actually using terrible manufacturing practices, and but for those high net worth listeners, are there any high quality luxury brands they should be buying? Not forget ethical; they don't care about that, but quality, high
Well,
quality.
again, like I said at the beginning, I'm kind of like one of those guys that is obsessed with football and has all sorts of opinions about football, but never played a day in his life, right? Like, I am, like, put me in coach, right? Like, somebody needs to put me in the fucking game, which, by the way, my fantasy football team is winning this week, so I am a multifaceted individual. Thank you
Whoa.
very much. And to be fair, a lot of the people buying these brands are not actually high net worth. There's a lot of people going into a lot of debt to buy this, so even just seeing the brand that somebody has on doesn't necessarily mean they're high net worth. But, I would say, obviously, or not obviously, but one brand that, again, really is known for being genuinely high quality, worth the money is another separate question. But if you have the money, everyone, and I've seen them in person at secondhand stores, are Hermes bags. Like, Hermes is genuinely, like, if you get one of those and you take care of it, like, it will last many generations, right? Like, there are some very lucky women out there who have Hermes bags that were passed down from, like, their grandmother and are still in great quality, and condition. And so I think, especially when it comes to bags, it seems to be the general consensus that a lot of people have, which is theirs are very good. Loewe, also a Spanish brand. I've never bought anything from them. To be clear, I've never bought Hermes either. I've just, interacted with it at secondhand stores. Loewe is also known to be very high quality and very beautiful. But then honestly, I would just say, like, rather than thinking, oh, this brand, that brand, I think what's more important is just like Nancy was saying, like, curating and, like, developing your own sense of style and aesthetic and what you really like, and going shopping, reading, going shopping at secondhand stores and actually, like, seeing things in person, right? Because that's when you'll really get a sense of what is and isn't worth the money. And by the way, the vast majority, except for basically Hermes bags, the vast majority of these, like, luxury products are significantly cheaper on the secondhand market, sometimes upwards of, like, 80 to 90% cheaper, depending on the brand or the product. So if that's something that you really want, like, just getting it secondhand actually can be a really great deal and a good way to kind of, get something that you might really value and find beautiful for a more affordable price. And then, yeah, like I said, just, like, kind of seeking out your own personal style and finding smaller designers, smaller brands that are, ethical maybe, but, at the very least, you're cultivating your own sense of style, and that's ultimately going to be a lot more kind of durable and meaningful, I would say, than just buying whatever has the best logo or whatever is, like, trending on TikTok.
I'm looking at a Hermes Merce here.
You should buy one.
It's so small.
You should.
And it costs 4,500 euros.
Yeah,
That's like the
and that's
cheaper
not even that
end
expensive.
of their Birkin
Yeah, their
bags are, like,
Birkins start at 10.
yeah.
What's a Birkin?
Google it. Birkin. It's their most famous bag, made for Jane Birkin. She basically sat next to the CEO of Hermes on a flight in, like, the
Who's
60s
Jane
or something.
Birkin?
Very, very
Who's an
famous
actress.
French-English actress. And she sat next to the CEO of Hermes on a plane and was like, she was very famous for carrying around these wicker basket bags. She was like, oh, it doesn't carry all my shit. I wish I had something that did. So he designed the bag for her, named it after her. The other famous bag they have that's extremely expensive is the Kelly, named for Grace Kelly, famous American actress of the 50s who married the Prince of Monaco and very famously hid her pregnant belly because it was shameful to be visibly pregnant in public back then. Had a big
Still
Kelly
is,
bag.
by the way.
Yeah, so you bitches are on watch.
Wait,
she
is
hid
this
her
why
shit-
the rappers talk about girls wanting Birkin bags?
Yes, I was gonna say,
Yeah.
Patrick, you've heard of Birkin because Black Bear has a song where he
Jesus
was
Christ.
bitching about
All-
his bitch wanting Birkins.
But,
all
yeah,
of
no.
Patrick's knowledge about fashion is through rap, and me too, frankly.
Well, we're getting off topic, and I do kind of need to go. It's 9 p.m.,
Yeah,
but just
I mean,
specifically about
I have a
Hermes.
turkey to cook.
Oh, delish.
Doing
Yeah,
late
Hermes,
Thanksgiving.
basically the way that they maintain their luxury status is because the way they produce things is so kind of small batch and by hand. The Birkin and the Kelly, which are their most sought after and most expensive bags. They're called what they say are quota bags, where you're only allowed to buy 2 per year, like one of each essentially, or 2 of one kind. And even though Hermes is known to be very high quality and much more, at least nominally, ethical in the way they produce things, the prices are so high because it's such low supply for such high demand. And the way they kind of almost like offset that is by, in order to essentially get one of these quota bags, you almost have to like prove yourself to the brand and just, show that you're a loyal Hermes customer. So there's this whole practice of basically buying other shit that isn't the bag you want and developing a purchase history there. And then when your sales associate feels like you've purchased enough, which by the way, they make a crazy commission on the other shit you buy, then they'll offer you one of their quota bags. Whether it's one of the quota bags you want, that's a coin toss. There are some women who will literally like get offered an orange bag that's 3 times bigger than what they wanted, but they buy it because, oh my God, I got offered a quota bag, and you can't turn down a quota bag. And then, so then there's this whole social media thing of the Hermes game and how to get your Hermes quota bag, right?
This stuff pisses me off so much because it's such a mystification of like what these commodities are.
Yep.
Like these things are plans. Like by like observing one of these bags, you can build a plan for how this bag, like the pieces you need to sew together, and then you can just get an artisan to do it. Like it isn't. I hate brands. Brands.
Quite literally, that now in China, because there are skilled leather craftsmen here, it's very easy here to get a essentially Hermes bag because they actually source the leather, a lot of it from China. So you can get essentially an Hermes bag, but made by a Chinese artisan for a significantly cheaper price, which I have been actually considering because I do really like the Kelly. So maybe I'll be sporting a Chinese Kelly one of these days if I can find a good artisan here. But actually, Hermes was taken to court in California. There was a class action suit of women saying that this was like unfair business practice, antitrust, some antitrust class action thing, I think, in California. And the judge threw it out because they were like, you
can buy a normal bag from a normal company.
Or like you don't have to buy all the crap. You know what I mean? Like the judge in California essentially was like, who are these crazy bitches?
Since we're talking about Hermes, I have to add one last thing that I found because this is incredibly bizarre that I found while researching this. So in 2011, LVMH tried to do a hostile takeover of Hermes. And they failed. They were, I don't know how, they were out financially maneuvered by the Hermes leadership. And afterwards, this is in British Vogue, the CEO of Hermes, Patrick Thomas, provoked shock in Paris this weekend as he attacked LVMH's methods in acquiring 200% of the heritage leather brand. And I have to read this quote I apologize for reading this quote in a French accent because it is the kind of quote that needs to be read in a French accent. If you want to seduce a beautiful woman, you don't start by raping her from behind, Thomas said. Isn't that such a quintessentially bizarre, creepy French CEO thing to say?
Jesus Christ. Oh my God. Well, I think that's a really great piece of advice to end on. If you want to seduce a beautiful woman, you don't start by raping her from behind. Maybe rape her from the front first.
Anyway.
No, have some class.
The French CEOs, one of the most incredible type of people in the world. Rachel, thanks so much for coming on and talking to us about all this. Nancy, thank you too.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for listening.
Bye-bye.
And don't forget to sign up for our newsletter, everybody.
Yes, sign up on royalpalacemedia.com.
Woohoo.
La France est une chose, à mes yeux, très considérable. Je me fais en effet de la France une certaine idée. Je veux dire par là qu'à mon sens, elle est quelque chose de très grand. Je me fais en effet de la France une certaine idée. Il y a même là quelque chose d'extraordinaire. Je me fais en effet de la France une certaine idée. soit la France.